Hello everyone, welcome to the Gaming Memory Lane. This is the first in what I hope will be a series of videos where I replay games that I first experienced when I was younger and see how they held up, how they maybe changed my view of gaming, and hopefully even some things that I may have missed all those years ago. Today I'm going to be revisiting Empire's Dawn of the Modern World. Empires is a spiritual successor to the critically acclaimed Empire Earth. It was made by the same studio using the same engine. Empire Earth was a game that completely changed my view of RTS games, being the first one that I played that had 3D graphics, and also the first one to include prehistoric, modern, and even future ages in which to play. When making Empires, the team at Stainless Steel Studios aimed to take advantage of the fact that this wasn't a direct sequel to Empire Earth, and tweak, improve, or remove some of its features in order to make a game with different enough gameplay that still carried the soul and feel of the previous one. For example, surveys revealed that out of the 15 ages that players could advance through in Empire Earth and its expansion, the bracket between the Middle Ages and World War II were the most popular, so they decided to base empires around these 10 centuries of human history. There was also the decision to reduce the number of playable civilizations to about half as many. However, every civilization in Empires, aside from basic gameplay systems, is almost entirely different from the others. Not with the stat-based civilization bonuses, but also visuals and gameplay mechanics. The option to create a nation of your own was also removed. This was the result of the team having a multiplayer-focused approach to the game. Developers were even separated into two different teams that each worked on the multiplayer and single-player aspect respectively, with the single-player team mostly only focused on creating the story-based campaigns. Empires plays very similarly to other RTS games of its time. Resource gathering and production efficiency are the key. Town centers make your villagers, military buildings produce your units. Settlements can have villagers garrison in them to create another town center and further improve villager production. Universities allow you to research classified projects. It's basically a fancy way to say that your nation has superpowers. These replace the profits from the previous game and are unique to each nation. For example, Russia can call down a fucking asteroid from space. Military units follow a more complex set of rules than the basic rock, paper, scissors, making it so that your army composition can be flexible enough as to not get stale. The armory allows you to research upgrades that you can then apply to a unit. Then, for the rest of the game, all units of that type will be upgraded. There are a limited number of upgrades, and each unit can only have one upgrade assigned to them. It gets more complex as you advance through the ages, like the addition of flying units, but nothing too crazy. It's still fairly easy to understand. Cutting down on the number of nations you play as and the ages you play in, as well as using the same engine, allowed the team to flesh out the game visually. There were new additions like a physics engine and reflection mapping, as well as added detail to the models. Units went from looking terrifying to just slightly disturbing. But beyond that, I think the game had a much more historically accurate look, thanks to every civilization having its own unique units and mostly its own unique buildings. There wasn't the tank. Each nation had its own tank. Same with airplanes, cavalry, archers, you name it. There is the strange lack of snow and jungle environments that were present in the previous game. No idea if this was a budget or a time issue, but map variety does suffer a bit because of this, since the game is left with only 2 biomes to use as environments. Also, while clearly looking much better than Empire Earth in many aspects, the soundscape is similarly nightmarish. The overabundance of stock sounds constantly repeating themselves can be too much at times, especially the horses. I don't ever want to hear a horse dying again. Let's take a look at the campaigns. There's 3 of them, and they're not great. Before I criticize the campaigns, I have to say that I'm very biased here. This was never the true appeal of these games to me, not even as a kid. I'm more of a skirmish battles kind of guy. I always found the sandbox nature of these to be much more interesting and fun than the narrative constraints of the story mode. Not just in Empires, many RTS games do this, but I don't remember any being as restrictive as this one. Let me show you. Let's take a look at the first campaign, The Adventures of Richard the Lionheart during the Middle Ages. We start with a cinematic cutscene where you learn that your brother Henry is clearly up to no good. After making a quick mental inventory of his lands, Richard realizes his town of Clairvaux isn't as well defended as he would like it to be, so he travels there with his brother Geoffrey. Once you get there, you're told that the town needs more stone to build proper defenses. There's a quarry on an island to the south, so you have to go there by boat and defend the quarry as you take the resources. At this point you are given a trebuchet. Why? I don't know. I'm mostly fighting infantry, so at first it seems like a weird choice. It does have the ability to launch plague-infested cows, so I was more than happy to use it. The stone from the island isn't enough. You're advised to go talk to a stonemason that might know where to get more. He is in an unreachable part of the map. It took me a minute to figure out that the correct path to the stonemason was taking the boat upriver, finding a watchtower, almost getting killed by it, then using the trebuchet to shoot it across some hills, and then landing my 2 characters safely. This is some rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle kind of shit. The stonemason needs his tools. You ride to his house where there's some bandits, persuade them, then recover the tools. Your villagers can now gather stone from ruined buildings scattered around. Still not enough stone. You then have to decide between tearing down parts of the town church or the castle to get the remaining materials. I don't know, maybe this was a test to see if the player believes in God or something. Oh well. Don't tear it down completely though, the town will get upset. Anyway, now there's enough stone to build the 1 tower needed to complete our defenses. You are then finally given full control of the town to prepare for a big bandit attack. You repel them and mission accomplished. The fact that a lot of the mission is your 2 riders and the trebuchet is visually very amusing. It looks like the piece of artillery is their loyal mascot. Gameplay wise though, it's kinda boring. The game is called Empire Dawn of the Modern World, and I'm roaming the countryside with my brother, killing bandits, talking to stonemasons, recovering tools, dismantling churches. None of this is as fun as it sounds. Most of all because a lot of it is fighting enemies with your 2 hero units. This was almost 20 years ago. Technology did not allow hero units in RTS games to be much more than normal units with better stats. And I don't think anyone played these games back in the day thinking, man, I love watching my soldiers going ka-ching ka-ching with their swords. No, you want to build a city, and then a nation, and conquer your foes in epic battles. I'm not being unfair and only judging the first mission either. Most of them have these constraints, across all 3 campaigns. In the next mission you have to sneak into a city at night. The one after that is about building towers trying to delay an approaching army. The Korean campaign tells the story of a Japanese invasion. So naturally you have to escort these guys. A lot of the missions of the American campaign are basically Company of Heroes missions, but without the Company of Heroes gameplay. You get the point. All missions have a gameplay gimmick to keep the campaigns from being just a series of skirmish battles. It definitely puts the enormous imagination of the developers on display. They just haven't aged well and end up being kinda boring. The narrative is also not very interesting, with cliché plots and atrocious voice acting.
Quite certain. You see, he was killed by the same man who murdered Prince Henry and your father.
How do you know this?
Because I am he, and you must make ready to join them.
There are moments where you can't help but laugh, but I don't think that was the intention.
You have been alone in here for hours. Please, you must eat something.
Thank you, Edward. I will.
Your Highness? Your Highness!
What was that? Your Highness! As far as the cinematics go, I understand that this is an old game and making them use in-game models was probably the only feasible way. There's just so many of them, and they're so long. Some shots just linger there, for way too long, and for no reason. These are not all missions. About half of them are entirely cinematics. There's even a cinematic battle. Why didn't I get to play this? It looks way more fun than anything I've been doing so far. Then there's the issue of historical accuracy. Not in the gameplay, but in the narrative. Take this quote from Rick Goodman, the project lead for Empires as well as Empire Earth.
In the past, historical realism has tended to constrain gameplay to a finite set of established conventions, which have been used again and again. At Stainless Steel, we felt that history had provided us with a vast wealth of inspiration for incredibly exciting gameplay. History should not be limiting at all. In fact, just the opposite is true.
I think when it comes to gameplay, this was a very wise decision that in the end paid off. For example, one of the Chinese units is a dude with a bow and arrow strapped to a kite. These guys are hilarious. They look like something out of a cheat code. Make enough of them and the AI doesn't really know how to deal with them. It's great. But some things about the narrative make me think that they took many liberties with the actual events as well. Now, I understand that it's not a game developer's job to teach history, but some of these story bits sound like straight up fanfiction. I know next to nothing about either Richard the Lionheart or Admiral Ji Sun Sin, but I do know a fair amount about World War II, and I don't remember General Patton being an African 42 on a secret mission to stop the Germans from developing nuclear weapons.
You'll do nothing of the sort.
DeMarco! What the hell are you doing here?
Making sure the Great Inquisitor reaches Germany safely, of course.
Traitor! You're crazy to let them get their hands on a weapon like that!
Who says the Germans are gonna get it?
Who's in there? What the devil is going on?
These parts of the American campaign made me doubt if all the drama centered around Richard, his brothers, and the succession really played out the way it did. Same thing with the story the second campaign tells. It's not a huge deal. Game developers take creative liberties all the time. I just remember being very proud as a kid of my knowledge of history thanks to games like this one and Age of Empires, Rise of Nations. Now I feel like I have to make inventory of what I learned and fact check it. So yeah, if the campaigns didn't rock my world 18 years ago, they were obviously not going to do it now. Like I said, to me this was never the appeal of these games. The true meat and potatoes was, and is to this day, skirmish battles versus the AI. No, not other players, those would wreck me I think. But figuring out the AI and outsmarting it, getting to a point where you can predict almost every move, to me it never gets old. With Empires, the developers aim to please both sides of the fanbase by offering different modes. Research showed that players were split pretty evenly between preferring a slow empire building approach and a faster, more action-focused pace. And so the game was divided into Empire Building mode and Action mode. Empire Builder is all about slow-paced defense. More resources are available, but less villagers are allowed to gather at a single resource point. Technology research is cheap, but age advancement is expensive. Fortifications are also way stronger. Action mode has more citizens allowed per resource point with faster gather rates, but these will run out eventually. Age advancement is cheap, and there's a last point which strikes me as a weird design choice. Units turn and accelerate faster. After playing both modes a few times, I can tell you that the action mode unit control feels like it should be the standard for the game. Unit pathfinding is still horrible, but at least they feel more responsive. As a result, battles in action mode ended up being slightly more enjoyable. Like many games of its kind, Empires is about the triumph of growth and mass production. The key to defeating the AI is maxing out your resource gathering and unit production with every decision you make. You cannot have the barracks. You need to have 4 or so. Same with factories, airports. At first, it's fine to tell a town center to create 6 villagers, but try to have 6 centers create a villager each. Time is of the essence here because your opponent does not play fair. The AI is pretty dumb. The developers tried to hide this by allowing it to use cheat codes. If you ever want to play this game and like me enjoy battling the AI, I found that it's much more enjoyable on teams, since the cheating enemy AI will not necessarily focus you down and will instead dedicate time and resources in fighting your cheating ally, giving you time to build up your force. On a high enough difficulty, I found it impossible to 1v1 the AI. It gets resource bonuses, production times, and can seemingly see through the fog of war. This is all very clearly visible in the endgame statistics. After some testing, I realized that even using cheats myself, it's still pretty hard to keep up with it. See all these planes? None of them got to their destination. Looking at some of the decisions the AI makes, it's sort of understandable that they mask it up with cheating. Oh sorry, I don't mean this. I mean this. What's going on here? Come to think of it, this might be the reason the campaigns are the way they are. Fighting against a cheating AI in a story-based scenario would be not ideal. Okay, time to see if there's friendly fire. That's one way to clear a traffic jam. Still, I cannot deny that I had a lot of fun revisiting skirmish battles. The matches between large teams would sometimes take up hours, and not a single dull moment in between, especially in the final ages with units from the 2 Great Wars. Planning large-scale invasions using combined arms strategies was always my favorite part of these games, and it was no different in Empires. I mean, look at this. Tell me it doesn't look really cool. So what happened with this game? Well, it got fairly good reviews at launch and sold pretty well. The deal signed with Activision was apparently a multi-game contract, but Empires was the only thing to come out of it. It was compared negatively with other RTS games that came out around that time, namely Medieval Total War and Rise of Nations. I never played Medieval, but having put a fair amount of hours into Rise of Nations, I have to agree with it being the superior game. That does not make Empires any less special. As a successor to one of my favorite childhood games, it went above and beyond, offering a much more tightly crafted experience that made it feel more historically accurate than its predecessor, while still carrying the same soul. As a child, I barely even noticed these things, so it's nice to appreciate them now. The fact that Empires had a much smaller scope, with more detail and focus than Empire Earth, didn't even register on my young brain. I saw the box, I saw the company logo, and that's it. Shut up and take my grandma's money. It would be the last game developed entirely by Stainless Steel. The studio was shut down a couple of years after the release of Empires, on the finishing stages of what would be their new game. Apparently, just a few weeks before the game went gold, their new publisher Midway Games cut off funding for the project. These games mostly don't get made anymore, so it was very nice to revisit this classic. In my experience, not a lot of people played it compared to Empire Earth, which is pretty sad. If any of you watching did play it, I would love to read your experience and opinions down in the comments, and whether or not you like the format and would like to see more games. Growing up, I never got to talk much about these things with anyone, so this is a nice opportunity to change that. Thank you very much for watching, consider liking and subscribing for more of these, game reviews and other stuff. I have to go now. I'm being the victim of war crimes again.
Your Highness!